I've spent over 70 years studying businesses, studying markets, studying people. And if there's one thing I've learned, it's this. You can tell everything about an organization or a person by watching what they do when they think nobody is looking. When I was a young man, my mentor taught me about, he called it the newspaper test. It's simple, really. Would you want every decision you make, every backroom conversation printed on the front page of your hometown newspaper for your family, your neighbors, everyone you respect to read? If the answer is no, well, you shouldn't be doing it. It's the ultimate test of integrity. And here's the thing. I've applied that to every investment, every acquisition for nearly 75 years. It's how you avoid ruin, not just financial ruin, but reputational ruin. And in the long run, they're the same thing. You see, trust is the only currency that matters. It's the only one you can't print more of. Once it's gone, well, it's gone for good. Why am I starting here? Because right now, in this country, we are watching a live public version of that newspaper test. And, the results are coming in, and they are not good. This is what I want to talk to you about today, not as a Republican, not as a Democrat, but as an American. As someone who has lived 94 years and who is, frankly, deeply concerned, I'm concerned for the system, the very framework that allowed someone like me to build a life. And I'm concerned for your savings, for your retirement. Because what's happening in Washington, this isn't just politics. This is institutional decay. And markets cannot hedge against that. This is how retirees get wiped out. Not in a sudden crash, but in a quiet, steady erosion of all the rules we depend on. You see, when the same institution files a third warning report within one cycle, that's not noise. That is a signal, a very loud one. And in my world, signals, structural signals, they matter infinitely more than the day-to-day headlines. So let me tell you what's happening. Breaking just moments ago, an announcement you probably didn't see on the nightly news. A certain Democratic representative just introduced new articles of impeachment against President Donald Trump for the third time. Now, I know what you're thinking. We've seen this movie. But listen to me. This isn't a rerun. These aren't the same charges. No Ukraine. No January 6th. No. These are new allegations rooted in recent actions. Actions that, they raise fresh constitutional alarms. And from an investor's perspective, from a systems perspective, this matters. It matters more than the inflation rate or the jobs report. Why? Because it attacks the trust in the system itself. You see, institutional fragility. It doesn't start with a bang. It starts with a quiet pattern. Little cracks, small compromises, lines that get crossed just a little bit until the entire foundation is unstable. And that is what I see happening right now. Let me walk you through what's happening, because the details here, they're what matter. The argument is straightforward. The charge is that the president has repeatedly acted in ways that undermine the Constitution and, governance itself. Unauthorized deportations, harmful tariff strategies, things that bypass the very agencies set up to manage them. Weakening of key federal bodies. Now, in capital markets, when we see a CEO who starts firing the auditors or bypassing the board or distorting the rules that ensure fair oversight, what do? We don't just adjust expectations, we sell, we run, because we know that power unchecked isn't efficient, it's expensive, it's a liability. What we are witnessing here is the growing cost of this institutional fragility. And here's the thing. This is the part that should concern every single person with a 401k. You cannot hedge this. You can't buy a put option on the Constitution. You can't short public trust. When that goes, everything built on top of it goes with it. Your savings, your pension, they are all underwritten by this system of rules. And the rules are being tested. Now, you see, with Republicans holding the majority in the House, well, the odds of immediate success, of removal, they're slim. We all know that. Despite Democrats initiating the push, conviction requires significant bipartisan support. But listen, this is what people are missing. Impeachment isn't always about removal. Sometimes it's about the record. It's about precedent. A third official attempt, that right there is a constitutional anomaly. In my 94 years, I have never seen this pattern. Never. And here's the danger. If it proceeds, it reshapes how future leaders calculate risk. It becomes a tool. If it fails, well, it may normalize a dangerous precedent. It may signal that the rules, they no longer matter, that the lines can be crossed without consequence. Either way, the long-term effects on trust, on law, on civic capital, those are what we should be measuring. Because in any system, credibility compounds just like interest. And once it erodes, well, it rarely, if ever, returns at the same value. This is the structural fracture I'm warning you about. This is the signal, and it's getting louder. What's happened over the past 2 days is particularly telling. You see, the conversation in Washington, it's shifted. It's moved from, well, speculation and noise to something else. It's moved to structural crisis. These new impeachment articles, they were filed just recently. And here's the thing. This isn't just political theater. From a risk management view, from my view, this is a turning point. And the real concern, well, it lies in what I'd call convergence. You've got these formal charges from Congress on one side, and then you have quiet talk, very, very quiet talk of internal intervention from Trump's own cabinet on the other. That dual pressure, that is the signal I'm talking about. That signals institutional fracture at the deepest level. You see, in corporate terms, it's like a board of directors considering both a massive shareholder lawsuit and a secret vote to oust the CEO in the same breath. You don't see that. You never see that unless the core system, the business itself, is under real existential stress. Now, here's where it gets, well, truly alarming for someone who values stability. Sources, credible sources, are reporting that high-ranking officials inside the administration have quietly discussed invoking the 25th Amendment. Let me explain what that means, because this isn't a political tool. The 25th Amendment, well, it allows for the transfer of presidential power if. the sitting leader is deemed unable to fulfill their duties. It was created for continuity, for moments when national leadership, the chain of command, must remain intact despite a crisis with the leader. And we're not talking about mid-level aides gossiping in the hallway. We are talking about cabinet-level deliberations. You see, I've observed leadership transitions in boardrooms for over half a century, and I can tell you this. I can tell you with absolute certainty when the insiders, the people in the room, begin contingency planning for a forced succession. Well, the issue is no longer about disagreement. It's about institutional continuity. That conversation, it only happens when those insiders believe that waiting, that inaction, brings a greater risk than the chaos of acting. What's unfolding right now is historically unique. We are witnessing formal impeachment proceedings from Congress overlapping with executive branch discussions about forcibly replacing that same sitting president. Listen to me. That is not noise. That is a constitutional stress test of the highest order. It shows that confidence isn't just eroding among political opponents. No, it's breaking down within the chain of command itself. In markets, when stakeholders at every level, from the shareholders to the board to the senior VPs, all start hedging against the same actor. Well, it's not volatility, it's the insolvency of leadership. And that distinction, that distinction matters because it shifts the question from whether removal is likely to whether institutional survival now depends on it. This moment is without precedent, not because political divisions are new. I've seen plenty of those. No. It's because internal confidence, the trust inside the building, appears to be unraveling. For key members of a sitting administration to signal this, well, it represents more than dissent. It's a sign that core operational trust has broken down, and you cannot run a country, you can't run a corner store when internal alignment disappears. Amid all this noise, one thing becomes crystal clear to me. It's increasingly difficult and dangerous to rely on surface-level reporting. You see, in business, we don't act on headlines. We look at fundamentals, incentives, behaviors. The same applies here. What matters is not just what people are saying, but who is saying it, why they're saying it now, and how it aligns with the patterns we've seen before. We are witnessing signals, not speculation. And smart decision makers, well, they learn to separate the two. This is what I'm urging you to do, because this is the pattern that threatens your retirement. This is the instability that regulators can't fix and the Fed can't paper over. This is the institutional fragility that, if it breaks, well, it takes everything else down with it. So let's return to the substance, because this is important. You see, these new impeachment articles, they don't recycle old narratives. We're past that. These are new claims rooted in recent executive actions, and, well, they raise fresh constitutional alarms, and that distinction is critical. Because when a new kind of problem emerges, a new precedent, the timeline matters. Markets, whether political or financial, they respond most sharply not to chaos. They can price chaos. No, they respond to uncertainty. Uncertainty about what the rules truly are. And that is exactly where we are now. In the past few days, we've seen a dramatic shift, not just in tone, but in the severity of the charges being raised. Some lawmakers, they are now describing the president's recent actions as a form of hostile engagement against the very country he serves. Listen to those words. These aren't metaphorical accusations. The phrase being used, I'm told, is treasonous warfare. Now, I've been on this earth for 94 years. I've seen hot political rhetoric. I saw the Red Scare. I saw Watergate. But this language from within the system, this is different. From a legal standpoint, it's rare. From an investor standpoint, well, it's catastrophic. It signals that confidence in executive restraint, the very concept that the leader won't burn down the house, has reached a breaking point. You see, when leaders are accused of acting against their own nation, we are no longer discussing politics. We are measuring the integrity of the republic itself. And here's the thing, that integrity, that's the only thing backing your 401. It's the only thing backing your pension. When that goes, the dollar is just paper. Your stocks are just entries in a ledger. This is the institutional fragility I've been warning about. This is what a real systemic crisis looks like. And alongside that charge, there's a second one, ongoing and systematic violations of constitutional rights. This isn't about a singular misstep, no. It's described as a repeated pattern, power exercised beyond its legal limits, and that kind of pattern, if confirmed. Well, in my business, if a CEO shows a pattern of breaking the rules, you don't wait for the third time, you get out, because you know where it leads. It leads to ruin. When rules are bent consistently without consequence, trust, that currency I mentioned, it decays. And when trust goes, so does stability. And when stability goes, every retiree gets wiped out. That is the iron law of markets. Now, legal scholars, constitutional experts, they've flagged two specific incidents that escalated these concerns. That triggered these new articles. Let me walk you through them, because the process matters more than the politics. The first, it occurred on September 22nd. The president issued an executive order purporting to designate Antifa a domestic terrorist organization. Now, regardless of one's view on that group, well, the constitutional process for making such a designation is well defined. It requires legal thresholds, interagency review, congressional oversight. You see, none of that was followed here. The concern, the structural concern, is not just about who was targeted, it's about how it was done. There is a well-established legal framework for this. It requires congressional input, multi-agency coordination, and adherence to the law. But in this case, the president, well, he just bypassed that entire process, issued an executive order unilaterally. That is a precedent. That is a structural crack. However, what followed, well, it was even more concerning. Reports surfaced, and this is the one that keeps me up at night, that a federal prosecutor may have been dismissed, fired, for declining to launch politically motivated investigations into the president's opponents. Now, in any system, political, financial, any system, when the enforcement tools, the auditors, the police, the prosecutors, when they are redirected for personal use, well, we stop measuring leadership and we start questioning legitimacy. To be clear, this isn't about miscommunication. This isn't policy disagreement. You see, if this allegation holds, it means a public official. A prosecutor lost their position for refusing to prosecute political rivals without sufficient grounds. Legal scholars are already calling this a serious breach of constitutional norms. It's not just about one job, it's about precedent. If the Justice Department, the very symbol of the rule of law, becomes subject to personal directives rather than legal standards, well, the rule of law takes a back seat. And once accountability is compromised, once the umpire is on the payroll of one team, well, the game is over. Rebuilding trust, it becomes exponentially harder. This is institutional decay in its most dangerous form, and it is a direct threat not to a party, but to the entire American system that underwrites every bit of your savings. According to multiple sources, a federal prosecutor was reportedly pressured to resign, for refusing to pursue criminal charges against a prominent state official. The message is clear: comply or be removed. Now, that tactic, it may sound like executive authority in motion, but in my world, it resembles coercion far more than governance. When leadership, any leadership, starts targeting its own appointees, its own compliance officers, if you will, for not executing political agendas, well, it reflects not strength, but profound instability. You see, in any boardroom, in any publicly traded company, forcing out voices of legal integrity, the general counsel, the CFO, for refusing to sign off on a cooked book, well, it would trigger audits, it would trigger mass resignations, it would trigger a shareholder revolt that would wipe out the stock overnight. In government, well, the stakes are even higher because the shareholders are the people. And the currency isn't just dollars, it's trust, the very trust that holds the dollars together. An emergency staff meeting was reportedly scheduled after this news broke. The news that a top federal prosecutor might be dismissed, and the reason? Refusing to pursue criminal charges against New York Attorney General Letitia James. That in itself is alarming. But what's more telling, what's the real signal here, is what happened behind the scenes. At the same time that these impeachment articles move forward in Congress, senior officials within the executive branch, they began holding private talks, not about damage control, not about PR. No, they were talking about invoking the 25th Amendment. Now, that is the convergence I warned you about. This is the institutional fracture happening in real time. It indicates something far deeper than disagreement. It suggests a total breakdown of internal confidence. Let me clarify what this amendment is, because, well, it's important. It's not a political toy. You see, the 25th Amendment is a constitutional mechanism. It allows the Vice President and a majority of cabinet members to formally declare that the President is no longer unable to discharge the duties of the office. It was created not for politics, but for continuity. For those terrible moments when national leadership must remain intact, despite a crisis. After January 6th, this idea, it wasn't abstract. Staff, family members, high-level advisors, they discussed ways to preserve institutional stability before the transfer of power. That tells you, well, it tells you how close the system came to collapse then. Multiple cabinet members at the time, they reportedly considered invoking that clause. Several chose to resign instead. A cowardly exit, in my opinion. If you see the house on fire, you try to put it out. You don't just walk out the front door. One senior figure went further, suggesting that the remaining cabinet step in and collectively manage the administration just to minimize the chaos. In corporate terms, that's equivalent to a board of directors moving to constrain a CEO in real time, stripping him of his check-signing authority, taking away his access to the company jet because they fear what he'll do next. It rarely happens, and it only happens when the risk of inaction is judged to be catastrophically greater than the fallout of intervention. In this case, it wasn't just about reputational risk. It was about preventing systemic failure at the highest level of government. And now we are hearing those same whispers again. This isn't noise. This is a signal that the people closest to the center are worried that the controls are failing. And when the pilots start arguing about who should fly the plane, well, every passenger, every investor, every retiree should be deeply, deeply concerned. Now, this push to hold President Donald Trump accountable, it hasn't just emerged overnight. You see, I've watched this build. It's been years in the making. Civil society groups, legal coalitions, lawmakers, they've been steadily compiling documentation, legal analysis, case material, all aimed at addressing what they see as, well, constitutional violations. But timing in matters of statecraft. Just like in an investment, well, it's everything. You can be right about the fundamentals, but if your timing is wrong, you still get wiped out. And Democratic leaders, they've exercised restraint, not out of fear in my view, but out of caution. You see a poorly timed impeachment, one that looks purely political. It isn't just ineffective, it's dangerous. It often reshapes the narrative, empowering the very figure it seeks to limit. And history, well, the recent history casts a long shadow here. Mr. Trump was impeached twice, and each time he survived the process. He survived it with his political capital intact, perhaps even enhanced. The Senate's refusal to convict, in both cases, it reinforced the perception among his base that he was the target of political theater, not legal scrutiny. And that perception, once it's embedded, well, it becomes a powerful asset. In markets, we see this. Perceived victimhood can translate into real momentum. That is the tightrope Democrats are walking. They risk legitimizing the very behavior they aim to challenge. And that is why leadership has been waiting. They've been waiting for a trigger, a signal, something so unmistakable, so institutionally disruptive that even members across the aisle, people who have looked the other way, would be forced to reconsider their position. They were waiting for a new precedent. And this recent executive order, the one labeling Antifa a terrorist group, well, that may just represent that turning point. For some, the move feels like overdue action. I understand that. But for others, for constitutional scholars, for people who study the rules, well, It signals a dangerous departure from due process, an erosion of legal precedent. And here's the thing, this isn't just about public perception. It's about whether executive action is drifting too far, dangerously far, from the system of legal constraints. The constraints designed to protect the balance of power. In a constitutional democracy, you see, power doesn't exist in isolation. There are guardrails, and they are there for a reason. The designation of a terrorist organization, for example, it follows a structured process. It's led by the State Department, supported by intelligence, and it's subject to congressional oversight. It is not designed for discretionary political use. When a president bypasses that entire framework and acts unilaterally, well, the issue isn't just legal, it's systemic. Leadership becomes unpredictable, and in both markets and government, unpredictability. Uncertainty about the rules. Well, that is the enemy of trust. These legal protocols, they are not red tape. They exist to prevent abuse. Declaring a person or group a terrorist, it doesn't just carry a headline. No, it activates mechanisms that can freeze bank accounts. Your bank account, they authorize surveillance without the usual checks and initiate arrests under special provisions. These are tools meant for national defense, not political advantage. You see, when those tools are deployed without meeting the legal threshold, constitutional scholars aren't just concerned, they are alarmed. Because if the system allows it once, well, it may not resist it the next time. That is the definition of a dangerous precedent. That is institutional decay. And this is how, bit by bit, the system that protects your savings, your property, your liberty gets taken apart. Now, we shift to the parallel case, the one involving a federal prosecutor, and this is where things get even more troubling for me. According to several independent sources, that prosecutor was allegedly instructed, ordered, to open investigations against individuals who were also, well, political adversaries of the president. Listen to me. This isn't just a story about personnel. This isn't about who gets what job. This is about institutional neutrality. You see, prosecutors in a functioning republic, they represent the legal system. They represent the law, not the ambitions or the grudges of any one leader. You see, if that line is crossed, if the Department of Justice becomes the personal law firm for the executive, you don't just erode trust in justice. You risk turning law into leverage, and that transformation, once it's set in motion, well, in my 94 years, I've learned that's a bell you cannot unring. That shift is not a small matter. According to multiple independent reports, some federal prosecutors may have faced dismissal, not for misconduct, not for incompetence. No, for failing to pursue charges that they believed lacked legal foundation. In the corporate world, if I had a CEO who fired his chief compliance officer or his general counsel for refusing to bend the rules or cook the books, I wouldn't wait. The board wouldn't wait. We would call an emergency meeting, and that CEO would be gone by sundown, because that is a signal of terminal rot. In government, well, the implications are infinitely greater. It raises concerns that prosecutorial independence, which is a cornerstone of American justice, is being treated as a transactional tool rather than a protected function of law. And here's the thing. This is what I need you to understand. This is the institutional fragility that affects your savings. Why? Because what is a stock certificate? What is a bond? What is the deed to your house? It's just a piece of paper. It's a promise. And what backs that promise? The law. The shared trust that the rules will be applied fairly, that contracts will be honored, that your property can't be seized on a whim. If the law itself becomes a weapon, well, then all those pieces of paper, all your savings, they're worthless. If the allegations prove accurate, and I stress the word if, then we are no longer in the realm of politics. We're looking at a serious breach of ethical governance, using prosecutorial authority to target political adversaries. It's not just wrong. You see, it breaks the chain of trust, the fundamental compact between the citizen and the state. In authoritarian regimes, the justice system serves the executive. But in a constitutional democracy, it must serve the law. Any deviation from that precedent, well, it invites long-term damage that cannot be undone by the next election cycle. In parallel with these concerns, another federal action made headlines. A judge, a federal judge, issued a temporary block against an effort to lay off thousands of government workers during the shutdown. The court, the judge, described the move as politically charged and reckless, citing the human toll of eliminating over 4,000 jobs without due consideration. In investment terms, this isn't just a labor issue. It's about governance risk. You see, when short-term tactics, short-term political games override long-term stability, value erodes. Whether in a business or in public service, decisions that ignore real human costs, that treat people as pawns, well, they tend to compound into broader systemic failure. Federal employee unions raised the concern that these layoffs, they were calculated, politically calculated, to exert pressure on Congress rather than respond to any operational necessity. With the impasse entering its third week, well, the broader impact is visible. One organization, Free Speech for People, they've been tracking executive conduct since the start of this second term. Their current report lists 25 separate justifications for impeachment. That number, it's not just symbolic. It reflects a growing pattern, a series of unchecked decisions that collectively threaten the rule-based foundation of governance. Some allegations on that list will sound familiar. Mishandling of classified material, financial entanglements. What's changed? What's the signal? Is the addition of 2 new items in just the past 48 hours. One from the unilateral Antifa designation. The other from the attempt to fire a federal prosecutor over political noncompliance. What sets this impeachment push apart isn't just the content. It's the coalition, the momentum. It's no longer confined to partisan lines. It's being echoed by voices across the legal and academic spectrum. Prominent legal organizations, former federal prosecutors, even some conservative constitutional scholars are raising the alarm. Their concern isn't about optics. It's about precedent. And listen to me, when the auditors, when the non-political experts, when bipartisan voices converge on the idea that a red line has been crossed, well, the conversation shifts. That is the signal breaking through the noise, and that brings us right back to the 25th Amendment. And that brings us back to the 25th Amendment ratified, you see, in 1967. I remember that time well, this provision. It was designed to solve a very specific practical problem, a business problem, really. What happens when your CEO, the president, becomes incapable physically, mentally, or otherwise of fulfilling the duties of the office? It was built not for crisis theater. It was built for operational continuity. And here's the thing. In my 94 years, I've learned that continuity is, well, it's everything. It's the secret ingredient. It's what allows capital to compound. It's what allows society to build things that last. Before this amendment, the United States had no formal process for this. None. If a president became incapacitated, well, the country was just exposed. A massive leadership vacuum. That's a terrifying risk profile for a nation. Section 4 of that amendment, that's the one. It addressed that gap. It allows the vice president, with support from a majority of the cabinet, to declare the president unfit to discharge the powers and duties of the office. You should think of it as an emergency succession clause, a key man provision, we'd call it in business, a mechanism built not for politics, but for institutional continuity. In moments of extreme vulnerability. In that scenario, the vice president immediately assumes the role of acting president. But here's what makes this clause, well, so frightening, so unprecedented in practice. It has never, in all our history, been used against a president who refused to step aside. We've had instances of voluntary transfers. When President Reagan had surgery, power was transferred. Simple, orderly, but never to a forced transition. The legal framework exists. The constitutional door is open. Yet no one has ever dared to cross that threshold under opposition. And this is the precedent I'm warning you about. If it happens, it won't just be a first. It will become a reference point, a tool, a weapon for every presidency to follow. And according to credible reports, high-level members of the administration, they are quietly weighing the possibility. These are not fringe voices. They include individuals tasked with protecting the integrity of the executive branch itself. Listen to me. When cabinet-level leaders, insiders, begin mapping out a constitutional exit strategy for a sitting president, well, that signals more than personal discontent. It reflects structural fear. You see, in corporate governance, when board members, the people who hired the CEO, when they explore forced succession in the middle of a crisis, the company has already lost more than just confidence. It has lost internal cohesion, the very glue that holds it together. The same logic applies here, only the stakes are infinitely higher. That conversation, the idea of invoking the 25th Amendment, it isn't theoretical anymore. It reflects a real calculation, a desperate calculation about institutional stability during the final stretch of a presidency under immense pressure over the last 48 hours, I'm told, the intensity of concern inside the executive branch has clearly accelerated, but, and this is a big but, acting on that concern, well, it carries a cost, a massive cost for those considering it. The political risk is, well, it's total. In today's hyper-polarized environment, even a legitimate, necessary action may be branded as betrayal, as a coup. And once that label sticks, it turns public servants into pariahs, cut off from influence, isolated, their careers over. So the mere fact that senior officials are still weighing this option, it tells us something profound. It tells us they believe the standard checks, the other guardrails, no longer suffice. The names aren't public yet, but based on reporting, well, the group appears to include legal counsel and national security personnel. These are not the political people. These are the people responsible for constitutional continuity and threat containment. If those folks, the ones who watch the system itself, if they now feel the system is slipping outside the bounds of self-correction, then what we are seeing isn't just alarm, it is a signal that the core mechanisms of restraint are perceived as ineffective. That is the kind of breakdown, the kind of institutional fragility that precedes a real intervention. This is the stress test. And when the system is under this kind of stress, well, that's when your savings, your retirement, everything you've built is at the most risk, because the system itself, the rules, are what's breaking. This urgency, well, it's no coincidence. You see, October 2025, that marks a narrowing window. Midterm elections are less than a year away, and political momentum, it tends to harden. It solidifies as voting season nears. Democrats understand this. They understand that once the calendar flips, the cost of delay, it may become irreversible. If Republicans gain seats in the next cycle, well, the chance to pursue impeachment, it could vanish altogether. It's a classic timing dilemma. Act under pressure now, or lose the ability to act later. In markets, we call that a missed opportunity cost. In government, it's often the beginning of paralysis. It's a signal that the institution knows there's a problem, but is structurally incapable of acting on it. And momentum, it's rarely driven by one event. It builds over time through repeated signals. In this case, the Antifa order and the prosecutor firing, these are not isolated anomalies. They're part of a sequence, a pattern, and inside the government, decision makers are increasingly seeing these moves as part of that pattern, one that may reflect a broader disregard for procedural limits. When institutions, when any system detects recurring stress points without corrective action, well, confidence begins to shift. It shifts from caution to alarm. Political theorists, well, they'll dissect this moment for years, but the more urgent issue to our issue is the institutional response before the pattern hardens into precedent. What we're watching is a collision. It's a collision between constitutional principle and political execution. And like any system under pressure, well, outcomes become more and more unpredictable the longer they're delayed. If the House were to proceed with impeachment, the first step would be a formal vote. With Democrats currently holding the majority, that path is procedurally possible. But in matters of governance, a vote isn't just about numbers. It's about timing, it's about perception, and it's about consequence. Every institutional move now, it sends a signal. It sends a signal not only to voters, but to future administrations about what is tolerated and what is challenged. And here's where the road narrows. A successful impeachment in the House, well, it doesn't end the process. No, it just shifts the burden to the Senate. And conviction there, removal, it requires a 2/3 majority. That threshold, it isn't just mathematical, it's cultural. It demands a level of bipartisan agreement on constitutional limits that, well, frankly, I have not seen in decades. And here's the thing. This is what I want to talk to you about. This is what matters to every person with a 401k. The failure of that vote in the Senate, which is the likely outcome. That is not the end of the story. It is the start of the real damage when accountability visibly fails. When the system publicly proves it cannot police itself at the highest level, that is the signal that breaks the system. That's when trust, the invisible foundation of our entire economic system, evaporates. Because if the rules, the highest rules, don't apply to the most powerful, why should they apply to contracts, to property rights, to the banks? That is how a system unravels, not in a sudden crash, but in a crisis of faith. That is the institutional decay that wipes out retirees. As for the 25th Amendment, that talk, it will probably fade. It will fade from conversation. Why? Well, the political cost is just too steep. The legal foundation is too untested. Cabinet members, they will weigh the risk to their reputations, their careers, and most will conclude it's not worth acting. In capital markets, we call this reputational risk aversion. In politics, well, it becomes a kind of strategic paralysis, and this is the most terrifying signal of all. It's when everyone in the room sees the cliff ahead, but no one is willing to take the first step away from it. That is institutional failure. The very fact that this conversation is happening in all these different places, in the halls of power, in media cycles, and, well, in living rooms. That tells us something critical. But here's what everyone is missing. They're all watching the action. They're watching the impeachment articles, the speeches, the breaking news banners. And here's the thing, that's all noise. The real signal, the one that has me concerned, is the paralysis, the failure to act. You see, the House, yes, it's likely to move forward. And the media storm, well, it'll be substantial, hysterical. They'll talk about history. If the articles pass the House, Trump would become the only president in American history to be impeached 3 times, and everyone will argue about what that means. But in my world, in the world of risk and balance sheets, that historic fact, it's not a symbol of accountability. It is a signal of impotence. It sets a precedent that you can stress the system, you can cross the lines, not just once, not twice, but 3 times. And the system is too fragile, too divided, too weak to do anything about it. The Senate, that remains the real test. And as we've discussed, the effort will likely stall. Of course it will. Republicans will frame it as partisan overreach. Democrats, well, they'll argue it's about accountability, the preservation of norms. But as with most polarizing events in modern politics, the narrative will fracture. It'll break apart. Each side will speak to its base and the broader public. The shareholders of the republic will be left to interpret the noise. The nation, already divided, will likely remain split. Public opinion, it won't shift overnight. Not in this environment. And that split, that's the symptom of the institutional decay. When the center, the rules, the very Constitution, when that's no longer a shared foundation, well, of course people split. There's nothing left to hold on to. And as for the 25th Amendment, that talk, it will fade. It will evaporate. Why? Because, as we said, the political cost is too steep. The legal foundation is too untested. Cabinet members will weigh the risk, not to the country, no, but to their reputations, to their careers. And most, they will conclude it's not worth acting. We called it strategic paralysis. It's institutional failure hiding behind risk management. Everyone sees the cliff, but no one wants to be the first to tap the brakes for fear of offending the driver. And that combination, a failed impeachment and a non-starter 25th Amendment, that is the signal that will echo. It's a signal not just to Americans, but to the world, to our creditors, to every nation that holds our debt. It signals that our institutional guardrails are no longer functioning, that they are just words in a textbook, and that is the precedent that breaks the bank. That is how your savings, your retirement, how it all gets wiped out. Not with a bang, but with the quiet, corrosive rot of failed accountability. The very fact that this conversation, all of this conversation, is happening inside the halls of power, in the media, in our living rooms, that tells us something critical. But it's not just noise, it's a signal. It means decision makers, some of them inside the administration itself, believe the situation is no longer sustainable. You see, from my experience in both business and civic life, when insiders, the people who know, when they begin raising red flags, well, it rarely stems from ideology. No, it comes from a deep, profound discomfort with risk. And in this case, the risk isn't financial, not directly, not yet. The risk is institutional, and that should concern every single American. Whether you follow politics daily or You try to tune it all out because structural failure, it doesn't start with a collapse. It never does. It starts with silence. It starts with a quiet normalization, a normalization of things that were once, well, frankly, unthinkable. At its core, all of this impeachment, this 25th Amendment talk, it's a test. It is a constitutional stress test of our entire architecture. Can our institutional guardrails, can they function when they are under real, sustained stress? Not in theory, not in a textbook, but in practice. Is the legislative branch, is Congress still a meaningful counterweight, or has partisanship, this tribalism, has it hollowed out its courage, its very purpose? Do cabinet members, do they act as fiduciaries, as trustees of the republic, or are they just loyalists to one person? You see, I have always said in business and in life that character, real character, it's revealed under pressure. The same is true of institutions, and we are finding out right now in real time whether checks and balances are more than just nice words printed in a history book. This is not just a political trial. This is a stress test of the American promise. And this is what I want to talk to you about today, because this is what matters to your retirement. This is what matters to your children's future. What happens next? The outcome of this stress test, it will echo far beyond one presidency if accountability fails now. And, well, from where I'm sitting, it appears to be failing. We set a precedent, a devastating precedent, one that future leaders, regardless of party, will study very, very closely, and not for the right reasons. You see, if power, raw, naked power, faces no cost when it's abused, well, the entire incentive structure of our democracy, it warps, it breaks. You don't need to be a 9-4-year-old investor to see how that plays out over time. It's not a good chart. It only goes down. But if this moment were to yield real proportionate consequences, we might just restore the idea that no individual, not even the president, is above the system. And in the long run, that is the only signal that markets, that citizens, and that democracies can respond to with renewed faith. But what I am seeing, what this paralysis, this institutional failure, what it signals to me is that we are failing the test. And when you fail a test of this magnitude, the cost, well, the cost is incalculable. It's how retirees get wiped out. It's how systems, great, powerful systems, collapse when institutions, when they start exercising their constitutional muscles. It sends a ripple through the system, or at least it's supposed to. It sends a signal, not just to lawmakers, but to markets, to businesses, and to everyday Americans. A signal that the rules matter, that the guardrails are still there. But here's the thing, and, well, this is what has me so gravely concerned. What if the institution exercises its muscles and nothing happens? What if the system tries to enforce accountability and it fails publicly? You see, if impeachment, this third one now, if it becomes just another procedural formality, just more noise, just a documented failure, well, then it loses the very deterrent power that's supposed to protect our republic. Accountability, you see, it's not just about today's headlines. It's about preserving the long-term health of a system built entirely on trust. And if leaders, whether we're talking about cabinet members or members of Congress or even voters, if they retreat into silence, into paralysis, well, the consequences won't just be political, they'll be cultural. And as any investor, any good investor will tell you, culture eats strategy for breakfast. Every single time, the landscape, it's still moving, it's shifting under our feet. You will see more voices from inside the administration deciding to step forward either out of a crisis of conviction or more likely out of simple self-preservation. That's just human nature. Documents may surface, timelines may shift, even party loyalty, it has its limits. When reputational risk, when the newspaper test I talked about becomes so steep, well, sometimes the cost of staying quiet finally outweighs the cost of dissent. But let's not be naive. I'm 94, I am not naive. There is also a very real, a probable chance that the machinery stalls, that the Senate acquits again, that the 25th Amendment talk remains just whispers. And in doing so, our system rewards defiance. That's the paradox of political inertia. That's the institutional fragility I'm warning you about. Sometimes it strengthens what it fails to stop. And that is a precedent that, it's one I'm not sure we can survive. What matters now is not just who wins the moment, but whether the country learns anything from it. Whatever unfolds next, it's going to be a case study for generations about leadership, about institutional courage, and about how our democracy responds to internal systemic stress. These aren't just volatile weeks, you see. These are turning points. And history has a way of assigning a very heavy, permanent weight to the decisions and the indecisions made in moments just like this. And here's the thing you must remember. We are not spectators in this story. No, we're all stakeholders. Whether we're managing capital or managing a small business or simply trying to raise a family and save for retirement, the integrity, the trust in our democratic infrastructure, well, that determines the climate. It determines the very ground in which we all operate. That's why it matters. That's why I'm here talking to you today. That's why I'm watching so closely. So the immediate path forward, well, it hinges on a very fragile calculus. It's not about who's right or wrong. It's about political courage and constitutional duty. And here's the thing. In my 94 years, I've learned that when courage and duty are the only things left, well, the system is already broken. You see, You never want to be in a position where you are depending on the courage of individuals. You want to depend on the strength of the system. On the rules, when you're down to just courage, well, that's a gamble. And I don't gamble, not with my money, and certainly not with the Republic. Now, the House, they may possess the procedural votes, the numbers. They can advance the articles, but that's just noise. That's theater. The true battleground, well, it lies in the court of public opinion, and more importantly, in those silent corridors of power where allegiances are tested. And in my world, tested allegiances means risk. It means unpredictability. And as I've told you, unpredictability, uncertainty about the rules, that is the enemy of stability. It's the enemy of your retirement savings. Because you see, the allegations, they're no longer about a single event. We are past that. This is about a consolidated pattern, a pattern of behavior that challenges the very mechanisms of accountability themselves. When I see a pattern like this in a company, a CEO who repeatedly bypasses the board, who fires the auditors, I don't wait. I know what comes next. It's called insolvency. It's called ruin. What we are seeing here, this is a signal of institutional insolvency. This is not merely a political crisis. No, that's what the headlines will call it. This is a diagnostic moment. It's a constitutional stress test. It's a test of the Republic's immune system. And the only question that matters is whether the antibodies, oversight, legal consequence, institutional pushback, whether any of them are robust enough or if they've been compromised. If the disease has become stronger than the cure, this is the institutional fragility I've been warning you about. Because if this immune system fails, if it proves it can't fight this off, then the next infection, the next challenge to the rules, well, it will be fatal. And these parallel discussions, this talk of both impeachment and the 25th Amendment, it reveals a system that is, well, it's panicking. It's exploring every available tool in its arsenal. This multi-pronged response, it indicates the severity of the perceived threat. The insiders, they are afraid. It is, yes, a sign of a living constitution, as some will say, but more accurately, from where I sit, it is a signal of profound distress. It's the signal a company sends just before it files for Chapter 11. It's a signal of desperation, and that is a terrible, terrible precedent. The markets. You know, I've spent 70 plus years watching them, and they've long understood a very simple core principle. Uncertainty is the enemy of investment. It's the enemy of value. It's like rust. It just quietly eats away at the entire structure until the whole thing is worthless. Similarly, in governance, ambiguity about the rules of engagement, ambiguity about whether the newspaper test I mentioned even matters anymore. Well, that erodes the foundational trust. And that trust, well, that's all we have. It's the only thing required for a stable state. It's the only thing that gives your dollar bill, your stock certificate, any value at all. The coming days, well, they're going to be a master class in real-time political risk assessment. And here's my advice to you. My My final warning on this: watch, but don't listen to the noise. Don't listen to the shouting heads on television. Watch the signals. Watch not only for the public statements and the procedural votes. Those are mostly theater. No. Watch for the resignations. Watch for the anonymous leaks, the ones that come from within the administration. And watch for the subtle shifts in language from key institutional players, the ones who aren't politicians, the generals, the heads of agencies. You see, these are the leading indicators. They are the signals of systemic change. They're the canary in the coal mine, the weight of history, and it is the weight of history. It now rests on the shoulders of a relatively small group of individuals, lawmakers, cabinet secretaries, senior advisors, and they must now decide whether their primary loyalty is to an individual or to the office, to the constitutional order that it's supposed to represent. They're choices made under immense pressure and public scrutiny. Well, they will become part of the permanent record. They will set a template, a precedent for how all future crises of legitimacy are managed in this country. And that is the precedent that will determine the value of your savings for the next 50 years. The cost of action, yes, it's high, but listen to me. The cost of inaction, the cost of this paralysis, the normalization of these actions, and the precedent it would set, well, that cost may be incalculably higher. It's a cost that could potentially alter the entire character. The risk profile of the American presidency for generations to come. This is not, it has never been about one man. It's about the system that is supposed to outlive him. It's about whether we, as a nation, still believe in the guardrails, the rules our founders built, or whether we've decided that they're just optional. Optional when they're politically inconvenient. In investing, I've always said the most important quality, it's not intellect, it's temperament. The same is true for a democracy. Do we have the temperament to enforce accountability when it's hard, when it's unpopular, when it divides us? That is the test. That is the constitutional stress test. And we are all being graded. Listen, I've lived through a lot of political turmoil in my 94 years. I saw the end of a world war. I saw the Cuban Missile Crisis, a time when, well, we all thought the world might end tomorrow. I've seen stagflation, crashes, panics, and I've watched the system bend. I've watched it crack, but ultimately it always held. This moment, it feels different. And that's why I'm talking to you. It feels different, not because the threats are new, but because the response mechanisms, the very guardrails I've trusted my entire life, they are being tested in ways, well, in ways they have never been tested before. And from where I'm sitting, they are failing. This paralysis, this institutional fragility, this is the signal. When the board of directors, Congress, proves it cannot or will not hold the CEO accountable for repeatedly breaking the rules, well, that's not a political story. That is a governance crisis. And when the other insiders, the cabinet, when they whisper about using the emergency clause, the 25th Amendment, but they don't, paralyzed by political fear, well, that is the final signal. It is a signal of total systemic failure. It is the moment, the precise moment, when trust evaporates. Not just public trust, but market trust, the trust of our creditors, the trust of every person, every nation that buys our debt, that believes in the U.S. dollar as a store of value. What we do now, what our leaders do, and what they fail to do, it will define not just this presidency. No, it will define the presidency itself for decades to come. That is a heavy burden, but it's also a sacred responsibility. And this is what I want to leave you with. This is what I need you to understand. This isn't about politics. This isn't about left versus right. I've seen that movie 100 times. It's just noise. This is about the system, the rules, the very architecture that allows us to have a stable society, the architecture that underwrites your savings, your retirement, your pension, the deed to your house, all of it. It's all just paper. It's all just a promise backed only by our collective faith in the rules. And what we are witnessing is a precedent being set in real time that the rules, well, that they no longer matter, that they are just suggestions. That is the institutional decay, and that is how retirees get wiped out, not in a single fiery crash one Tuesday. No, it's quieter than that. It's an erosion. It's the value of your savings being eaten away by the rust of uncertainty, eaten away by the slow motion breakdown of trust. The institutions we inherit, you see, they aren't ours to break. They're ours to protect. They're ours to pass on. And if we fail that duty, well, the cost won't just be political. It'll be generational. So pay attention, please. Stay informed, but learn to separate the signal from the noise. The noise is the shouting. The noise is the impeachment vote count. The noise is the nightly outrage. The signal is the paralysis. The signal is the failure of accountability. The signal is the precedent that action has no consequence. Remember, in any system, in any market, silence. Inaction, paralysis, that is a choice. And sometimes it's the most expensive choice of all. Thank you for your time.